The conference room on North Charles Street smelled like photocopier ink and stale central heating, and I remember thinking that a moment 40 years in the making should have a more significant smell. I sat with my hands folded on the conference table, wearing the deep burgundy sweater my daughter had given me years ago, and I looked at my husband Leonard across the narrow expanse of laminate surface and fluorescent light. He had arrived expecting what he always expected from me: confusion, maybe tears, an apology for the inconvenience of existing. He had not expected calm. He did not get what he expected. My attorney, a woman named Renata Torres, with a posture that suggested she had never once apologized for taking up space in a room, gave me a small nod from the left side of the table. Leonard's attorney sat rigid in his chair, fingers wrapped around a styrofoam cup that had long since gone cold. The paralegal had a laptop open. And Leonard himself. Leonard had leaned back slightly in his chair. The posture of a man who still believes he is the most capable person in any room he enters. I placed my phone on the table. I pressed play. For 7 minutes and 14 seconds, that conference room held nothing but the sound of my husband telling my sister that I would never find out what they had done. I want to stop right here, right at this moment, and ask you something directly. Because if you have ever been in a room where someone looked past you like you were furniture, where someone reduced you to a noun, a burden, a person too old or too quiet or too tired to matter, then you already know what it felt like to watch Leonard's face change when he heard his own voice played back to him. You know the particular weight of that moment when the person who underestimated you realizes what their underestimation has cost them. If you know that feeling, stay with me, because this story is going to take you somewhere better than where it begins. I promise you that. But let me take you back to where it actually started. If this story is reaching someone who needs it right now, please share it with them, because the woman who sat alone in that cold car for 40 minutes deserves to be heard, and so do you. It was January in Baltimore, Maryland. Winter in Baltimore does not announce itself the way winter does in the movies. It settles. It arrives slowly, and then stays, getting into the bricks of the old row houses, getting into your joints, getting into the pauses in conversations, until the pauses are all that's left. I was sitting in my parked car in the driveway of the senior living complex, not ready to go inside. I do not know how long I had been sitting there. Long enough for the windshield to frost at the corners, long enough for my breath to make small clouds that dissolved against the glass. I am 72 years old. I had on the deep burgundy sweater, worn soft at the elbows from years of washing, the kind of garment you keep wearing because it carries the feeling of the person who gave it to you, and you are not yet ready to let that feeling go. The neighborhood stretched in both directions around me, old brick and new glass condos rising beside each other in that uneasy coexistence Baltimore does so well, where gentrification has not finished winning and the old buildings have not finished losing, and both just stand there in the cold together. I know something about that kind of standoff. From the parking lot, I could see the windows of my senior living studio fogged over from the warmth inside. I had put the red beans and rice on before sunrise that morning. I had been doing that all winter, starting the food early so there would be something warm waiting when I came home, because warmth had become a thing I had to arrange for myself. The fog on the windows was soft and pale, like something exhaling. On the passenger seat sat the stack of unpaid bills held together with a rubber band, $23,400 in past due notices. Every account opened in my name, not one of them mine. I should have carried them inside. Instead, I sat in the cold car and thought about the hymnal from my mother's funeral, the one I keep tucked under my bed because I cannot bring myself to put it in a box. I have sung hymns in the church choir every Sunday for 30 years. I believe in goodness. I have always believed that goodness eventually finds the people who have been patient enough to wait for it. I did not know yet, sitting in that car with the bills on the seat beside me, that the patience I had practiced so long had been building towards something. That what looked like stillness was actually coiled. Something was wrong. I had known it for months. I just had not yet allowed myself to say the words out loud, in my own voice, to my own ears. I should have known sooner. But I have learned since then that the cruelest betrayals always happen where you are least willing to look. The first lie I ever told myself about Leonard was that his silence was a form of depth. This was 20 years ago, before the studio, before the neighborhood that couldn't decide what it wanted to be. When we were in the house on Harford Road, and I still had the kind of energy that made the day feel like something you moved through rather than something that moved through you. Leonard had always been a quiet man, and I had always translated his quiet as deliberateness, as care, as the particular dignity of someone who does not waste words. It took me an embarrassingly long time to learn that silence and wisdom are not the same thing. Some silences are just walls, and some walls are built specifically to keep you from seeing what's on the other side. By 2018, the walls had multiplied. It started with small things, the kind of things you notice but don't write down because they seem too minor to be evidence of anything. A conversation that shifted when I came into the kitchenette. Laughter from the other room that stopped at the sound of my footsteps in the shared hallway. My husband Leonard and my sister Patricia had always been cordial to each other, friendly even. I had told myself this was a blessing. I had watched other women navigate the hostility between a husband and a sister-in-law, and I had been quietly grateful that I did not have that problem. You might be shaking your head at me right now. You might be saying, "Sweetie, couldn't you see?" And I understand that question. But here is what I want you to understand about being erased slowly. It does not feel like an attack. It does not feel like anything sudden or violent or clear. It feels like you are simply getting smaller, and when you are shrinking, you do not look outward for the cause. You look inward because you have been trained your entire life to believe that the source of discomfort in any room is probably you. I practiced self-blame the way other people practice breathing. It required no effort. When the conversation stopped as I entered a room, I assumed I had said something wrong at some dinner I could no longer remember, and this quiet was what patience looked like between people who had run out of it for me. When my husband stopped asking my opinion about money decisions sometime around 2019, I told myself he was being protective, that he saw me getting tired and was trying to spare me the burden. When my sister Patricia began appearing at my kitchen table with more frequency, I told myself she was keeping him company while I rested. Every explanation I offered myself was one that required me to be the problem. I had spent decades perfecting the art of turning other people's behavior into evidence of my own failure. And so I gave up my health. I want to say that directly because I think it needs to be said. I ignored the warning signs for months, the headaches that came in rolling waves, the shortness of breath after climbing the 12 steps from the shared hallway, the blood pressure readings at the pharmacy kiosk that I looked at and then looked away from. I told myself it was age. I told myself every 72-year-old felt this way. I stood at the stove with aching knees and simmered the red beans and rice anyway, because the cooking was something I could control, something that reliably produced warmth. The beans were my mother's recipe. Red kidney beans, onion, green bell pepper, bay leaf, a long simmer that makes the whole studio smell like somewhere familiar. I have been cooking this since I was a young woman in that kitchen on Harford Road, and there is something about the smell of it, that deep, sweet earthiness of beans that have been cooking low and slow, that makes me feel less alone, even when I am very much alone. I started the pot before sunrise so there would be something good to come home to. That was the logic. That was the kind of care I could extend toward myself while I extended everything else toward everyone who had stopped extending anything toward me. The hymnal from my mother's funeral sits under my bed. I have never managed to put it into a box. Her handwriting is in the margins, small pencil annotations beside the verses she returned to most, the ones that held her when she needed holding. I sing in the church choir every Sunday. Or I did. There were 6 weeks in the fall of 2023 when I stopped going, when the energy for even that had left me. I told myself it was my knee. It was not my knee. It was 8 months of ignored symptoms and a body that was beginning to insist it had reached its limit. What I had sacrificed was everything. My health, my income, my belief in my own perception. My husband had asked me to sign my pension distributions over to him in 2019, saying it was simpler to manage finances from one account, $14,000 a year. I signed. I signed again in 2020 and 2021, and every year after, because I had been so thoroughly trained to see my doubt as ingratitude and my confusion as evidence of decline that I could not hold on to the word wrong long enough to speak it aloud. The second clue came on a Tuesday in early December. I came back from a church committee meeting and found a credit card statement on the kitchen counter, face down. Leonard's hand moved to it quickly, too quickly. Patricia looked at the ceiling. I said nothing. I went to bed. But something that had been sleeping in me woke up, quiet, patient, keeping count. December 12th, a Thursday, 11:18 in the evening by the clock on the bathroom wall. I was standing at the bathroom sink, and then I was on the tile floor. And the sound I heard was my own voice making a noise I had not planned to make. The paramedic in the ambulance told me my blood pressure was 190/110. I lay on the gurney and looked at the ceiling and thought, 8 months. 8 months of headaches translated into weather. 8 months of shortness of breath attributed to age. 8 months of my body sending messages in every language it knew, and me refusing to read a single one. Johns Hopkins kept me for 3 days. They adjusted my medications, ran tests, had a social worker come in on the second morning to ask how I was doing at home. I said I was fine. I was still saying I was fine. The word had become so automatic I could say it while feeling its exact opposite. On Sunday afternoon, they discharged me. A Sunday. Choir Sunday. I thought about that in the transport car on the way home. 30 years of Sundays. I thought about the hymnal under my bed, my mother's pencil marks, the particular verses she had underlined and returned to again and again. I am still here, I thought. Whatever comes next, I am still here. I came home early. Too early for Leonard to expect me. The kind of early that reveals the shape of a life as it actually runs, rather than how it presents itself when watched. The front door was unlocked. The smell reached me in the shared hallway before I was fully inside. My red beans and rice, the recipe, the specific warmth of it. Someone had found the frozen portions I had stored in the back of the kitchenette freezer. Someone had taken them out and put them on my stove, in my pot, on my burner. And sitting at my small kitchen table in my senior living studio, comfortable and unhurried, were my husband Leonard and my sister Patricia. They were laughing. Not guilty laughing, not nervous laughing. The easy laughter of two people who are completely at home. Neither of them heard me come in through the shared hallway. I want you to feel what I felt in that moment. Not as an abstraction, but the physical sensation of it. The way my feet stopped before I told them to stop. The way my hand found the door frame and held it. The way my chest understood what my mind had not yet fully processed. It was the feeling of finally seeing clearly something that had been blurry for years. Not anger, not yet, something colder. The specific chill of a long-held suspicion becoming knowledge. I stood just outside the doorway. I reached into the pocket of the deep burgundy sweater. I pressed record on my phone. What I captured in the next 7 minutes and 14 seconds, my husband Leonard's voice, relaxed and confident, telling my sister Patricia that I would never find out what they had done, that I was confused half the time anyway, that I did not understand money anymore. And my sister, the woman I had driven to doctor's appointments, the woman I had called on the night our mother died, responded to every word he said, not with hesitation or discomfort, but with laughter. Easy, genuine, unhurried laughter. When I finally walked into the kitchen, I said I was tired from the hospital. I went to bed. I lay in the dark for an hour, and then I got up and sat at the small desk near the window. I took the stack of unpaid bills from the bedside table, still rubber-banded, still holding their terrible shape, and I placed them beside the yellow legal pad I had pulled from the desk drawer. Then I did the math. $14,000 a year in pension distributions, signed over annually from 2019 through 2024. 6 years. The number on my legal pad, $0. 38 line items on the bills. Past due notices, credit accounts, medical billing accounts, none of them opened by me, all of them bearing my name. Another $23, $400 in accumulated balances. I wrote down every number. I wrote the total at the bottom of the page, and I looked at it. I had given everything I had. And in return, I had received silence at dinner tables and laughter that stopped when I entered rooms, and the sound of my own husband telling my sister I was too confused to matter. I looked at those numbers on the legal pad, and something inside me became very, very still. That stillness was not despair. I understand now that it was the sound of a decision forming, quiet and absolute, the way the most important decisions often are. The Sunday I came back to choir after my hospital stay, I arrived earlier than usual. I sat in my spot in the third row and held the program in both hands and just breathed. The sanctuary smelled the way it always does in winter: radiator heat, and old wood, and the faint overlap of everyone who has ever prayed in that building. I needed all of it that morning. I needed to be somewhere that had nothing to do with credit accounts or court dates or 7 minutes of audio I had already listened to 18 times. My voice was still there. That mattered more than I expected it to. Dolores sits 2 pews ahead of me. She has for 14 years. I knew her the way you know the people you pray alongside, the particular sound of her voice on the high notes. The way she reaches back slightly on the sustained notes, like she is pulling the music from somewhere deep, her preference for hymns that build slowly and arrive at their peak with patience rather than force. We had shared church bulletins and committee meetings and the occasional greeting in the parking lot. We had not been close in the way that involves telling each other things. After rehearsal, while the other women gathered their coats and exchanged updates about grandchildren and holiday plans, Dolores came and sat beside me in the empty pew. She did not say anything immediately. She just sat, which is its own form of communication, and one I have come to understand is rarer than it should be. Then she said, "You look like someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and is thinking about maybe setting it down." I had the word fine assembled and ready. That word has lived so long on the surface of my tongue that it launches itself before I make any decision to speak. But something about the directness in Dolores's eyes, the complete absence of performance in her posture, stopped it. She was not asking a polite question. She was asking a real one. "I found out something," I said, "about money, about my husband, and my sister." She did not move. She did not glance toward the door to check if anyone was within earshot. She simply nodded once and said, "Tell me." So I told her. Not everything, not all at once, but the bones of it. The accounts, the bills, the pension distributions, the recording, the legal pad with the numbers written in my own handwriting. And Dolores sat in that pew, in the winter quiet of the emptying sanctuary, and listened without interrupting, without her expression shifting into discomfort, or the particular kind of sympathy that is actually about the sympathy giver rather than the person speaking. When I finished, she reached into her handbag. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, carefully folded, the kind that has been unfolded and refolded many times before reaching you. "My son," she said. "He did something similar to me. Over 4 years. I lost a significant part of my income before I understood what was happening." She pressed the paper into my hand. "There's a legal aid organization in the city. They handle elder financial exploitation cases. This attorney, Renata Torres, she helped me recover what I could." I looked at the paper. A name, a phone number, a North Charles Street address. "You are not crazy," Dolores said. "You are not confused. You are not the problem." I want to tell you what those words did to me, because I think you might understand if you have ever been in the position of hearing your own truth spoken back to you by someone who has lived a version of it. It was not relief exactly. It was more like the feeling of suddenly understanding a word you have heard many times but never been able to define. Clarity. Someone was offering me clarity, freely, without asking for anything in return, and after years of having my perception managed and my confusion manufactured, clarity was the most powerful thing I had been given in a very long time. I held that folded paper in the inside pocket of my winter coat for 2 days before I made the call. 2 days of sitting at the desk by the window, unfolding it, looking at the name, folding it again. 2 days of asking myself what I was afraid of, and then asking myself why I was letting fear make decisions that belonged to me. On Tuesday afternoon, I called. Renata Torres answered the phone herself. Her voice was measured and clear, and when I mentioned the recording, she said simply, "Bring it." The voice of someone who has heard this story before and has not become indifferent to it, which is a very particular kind of grace. I had an appointment for Thursday, and for the first time in years, I was going somewhere that was entirely mine. There is a specific discipline required of a woman who is dismantling her life from the inside while maintaining its outward appearance. I became expert at it. Every morning, the red beans and rice went on before sunrise, the smell of them rising through the kitchenette and into the shared hallway, familiar and warm and exactly the same as it had always been. I ironed the deep burgundy sweater on Saturday evenings so it would be ready for Sunday choir. I said good morning to Leonard with the same tone I had used for 20 years, warm enough, unremarkable, the tone of a woman who has nothing unusual on her mind. I made that tone into an instrument so precisely maintained that even I sometimes forgot, for the span of a breath, that underneath it I was assembling something that would change everything. Dolores and I had established a rhythm. After every Sunday rehearsal, while the other women gathered their coats, Dolores and I walked to the side entrance of the church where the cold January air came through the gap at the base of the door, and I told her where things stood. She listened without urgency and kept the things I told her in the particular vault of a woman who knows the cost of a broken confidence. "The doubt will come," she told me one Sunday in late January, pulling her coat collar up against the Baltimore winter. "When it does, call me. Don't let it make decisions." She was right. The doubt came twice. I called her both times. She talked me back to the solid ground of what I knew versus what I was afraid of. Renata Torres had given me a list of instructions, specific and sequenced, and I followed each one with the care I had once given to music. The understanding that precision matters, that a note played slightly off changes the whole chord. A separate savings account at a credit union across town, one that carried no connection to Leonard's name or our shared banking history. Every bank statement I could access, photographed. Every diversion from my pension, documented. Every line item on the rubber-banded stack of bills entered into the spreadsheet the paralegal had prepared. The USB drive lived in the lining of my winter coat, inside a small zippered pocket I had never had reason to use before now. The recording was in my email, on the drive, and in Dolores's secure storage. 3 copies, 3 separate places. In early February, I did something that took me longer to work up to than I expected. I had been researching in the evenings when Leonard was in the other part of the studio and the television was on. Warm climates, Florida, Clearwater specifically. I had been there once, decades ago, and remembered the quality of the light, the way the air felt like an embrace rather than an obstacle. I found a 1-bedroom apartment in a building that allowed month-to-month agreements. I sent an inquiry. The management company sent a preliminary rental application. I printed it at the library on a Tuesday morning while Leonard believed I was at a church committee meeting. I sat at a library table with the application in front of me, and I filled it out in my own handwriting. My name, my income, my references. Not our name. My name. The space for co-applicant sat empty, and I felt the emptiness of it like a breath I had been holding for years finally released. I signed at the bottom, just my signature, no one else's name anywhere on the page. The first time in more than a decade that I had put my name on anything housing-related without another name beside it, and the feeling of the pen moving across that paper, forming the letters of my name, was so physical and so specific that I had to sit still for a moment afterward and simply let it exist. I mailed the application that afternoon. The close call came on a Wednesday evening in mid-February. I was at the small desk reviewing the spreadsheet on my phone when Leonard came out of the bathroom unexpectedly. He appeared in the doorway, and I turned the phone face down in one smooth motion. But my hands were less steady than I would have liked. "What are you looking at?" he said. "Hymns," I said, "for Sunday." He stood in the doorway for what felt like a full minute. His eyes were on me, not the searching eyes of a man who suspects something specific, but the flat, incurious eyes of a man who has already decided that whatever he is looking at does not require his serious attention. That look, the exact look that said, "She's fine. She's not capable of anything I need to worry about." I let him have it. I kept my face quiet and my hands still. He went to the kitchen. I turned my phone back over and kept working. By the first week of March, the legal machinery was in motion, and there was nothing left to do but wait for the day itself. Renata had filed the formal financial exploitation complaint. The deposition documents had been served. Leonard's attorney had reached out once. A phone call Renata summarized for me as exploratory, which she translated as, "They are trying to determine how much we have before deciding how frightened to be." They should have been very frightened. I spent those 2 weeks moving through the days with the particular calm that comes when a decision has been made completely, not just intellectually, but in the body, in the way you breathe, in the way the morning looks when you open your eyes to it. I was no longer angry, exactly. What I felt was something more like clarity, the specific sharpness of a person who has done the math and knows the answer, and is simply waiting for the moment when the answer can be spoken aloud. And I had done the math. $84,000 of my own money, redirected over 6 years. $23,000 in fraudulent debt opened in my name. Decades of income built through work and discipline, and the particular financial patience that working women of my generation learned because no one was going to build anything for us. We built it ourselves. And then that wealth, that accumulated fortune, quietly redirected by the 2 people sitting at my kitchen table, eating my food and laughing at my expense while I was in the hospital trying to stay alive. That was the number I held in my chest when I sat across from Renata for our final preparation session. She walked me through what would happen in the conference room, what the attorneys would likely say, what I should and should not respond to directly. Her instruction was simple. "Your job is to place the phone on the table and press play. The recording does the rest. Let me handle everything after that." I understood. The morning of March 14th, I dressed with intention. The deep burgundy sweater, a silver scarf my son had given me for my birthday, earrings from my mother's jewelry box. I wanted to walk into that room as the complete assembly of everyone who had ever loved me honestly, their warmth on my skin, their presence in the small, dear weight of old jewelry. I needed all of them with me in that room. I arrived at North Charles Street 15 minutes early. The lobby was warm and quiet, marble floors and the distant sound of an elevator. Renata was already in the conference room, folders arranged with the precision of someone who understands that preparation is its own form of power. Leonard's attorney arrived first, then a paralegal with a laptop, and then, through the glass panel beside the conference room door, I watched my husband cross the lobby. He had driven the Audi A8, graphite gray, exactly as I knew from the key fob I had seen on the table. He walked across the marble lobby with the ease of a man who has arrived at a place he expects to control. Coat pressed, shoes polished, chin level. He had always carried himself this way. The walk of a man who equates his own certainty with reality, who has never once been required to question his own authority in a room. The graphite gray car and its particular gleam had announced him before he entered. A man of resources, of standing, of profit and position. A man who had built a significant portion of that standing on the $14,000 a year that his wife earned from a pension she had spent her entire working life building. He sat down across from me and looked at me with the look he always used. The look that said, she is manageable, she is known, she presents no real challenge. I let him have it. I kept my face quiet and my hands still on the laminate table. Renata opened her folder. Before we begin formal proceedings, my client would like to play a recording. I placed my phone on the table. The trap was set. Every piece exactly where it needed to be. And I pressed play. 7 minutes and 14 seconds. The first words, "she'll never find out," hit the room like weather. Like something that had been outside the walls suddenly coming in. Leonard's attorney's hand tightened around his pen. The paralegal stopped typing. And Leonard himself, I watched him very carefully, moved through the stages in the span of a single minute. Disbelief, then the rapid calculation of a man trying to find a story that might still save him, and then something that lived just on the border of shame. The expression of a man caught not by an enemy, but by someone he had loved long enough to stop fearing. She's confused half the time anyway. She doesn't understand money anymore. Patricia's laugh, unhurried, genuine, the laugh of someone who has laughed at this particular subject before and expected to go on laughing at it indefinitely, filled the conference room with something I can only describe as its own kind of evidence. Not just of what was done, but of how long it had been done. With how much comfort, in how secure a certainty that I was not watching. I was watching. When the recording ended, the silence in that room was a living thing. I let it breathe. I had earned the right to let it breathe. Leonard's attorney was the first to attempt speech. Something about context, something about private conversations and their admissibility. Renata answered him with the composure of a woman who had anticipated every word and had a prepared response to each one. I did not need to follow the legal specifics. I needed only to be present in my own body, in my own chair, in my own life. Then I looked at my husband and I said what I had come to say. You told her I'd never find out. A pause. The pause of a woman who has earned the right to take her time. I found out. He opened his mouth. I held up one hand, just slightly, just enough, and continued. You called me confused. I wasn't confused. I was trusting the wrong person. There is a specific silence that follows a truth spoken clearly into a room full of people who have been operating on the assumption that the truth was not available. I have only experienced it once, and I do not expect I will ever need it again, but I will carry the particular weight and shape of it for the rest of my life. It is the silence of recalibration, of everyone in the room quietly revising the story they had been telling themselves about who the capable person in this situation actually was. You know what they expect of women like me? They expect tears. They expect apologies for the inconvenience of having discovered the truth. They expect the particular combination of devastation and self-doubt that they have spent years cultivating in us, so that even in the moment of revelation, we are still managing their discomfort instead of our own clarity. I gave them none of that. I sat in the deep burgundy sweater and I felt something I had not felt in years. The specific, solid sensation of taking up exactly as much space as I was entitled to. No more shrinking, no more translating other people's cruelty into my own failure. No more standing in the hallway outside my own life. Do you know what it means to reach 72 years old and finally understand? Not as a thing someone told you, but in the blood and bone, in the chest, in the specific physical sensation of a truth that has finally landed all the way. That you are not the problem? That is what sitting in that conference room felt like. That is what I want you to hold from this story, if you hold nothing else. Leonard tried to speak directly to me, past the attorneys. He said my name. Just my name, the way he used to say it years ago, when it still meant something. I looked at him, and I felt something I had not expected. Not anger, not triumph, but a quiet pity. This man had spent years building a story in which I was small and confused and incapable, and he had built it so well that he believed it himself. And now the story was gone, And without it, he was just a man in a pressed coat who had stolen from his wife and gotten caught by a phone in the pocket of a burgundy sweater. His attorney eventually spoke a new language: settlement, numbers, timelines. Renata looked at me. I nodded once. The quietest people in the room are sometimes the ones holding every card, and I had been the quietest person in every room for 20 years. I had held all of them without knowing it, and I had played them at the exact right moment. That is not luck. That is the particular strength that grows in women who have been underestimated so long that the underestimation becomes their advantage. I did not choose to be invisible, but I chose what I did with what being invisible allowed me to see. The court order came on April 3rd, restitution, $84 in diverted pension funds with interest, complete removal of Leonard from every financial account connected to my name, a formal injunction against any future access to my income, my savings, or my Social Security benefits. The judge had not been moved by arguments about the complexity of shared finances over long marriages. The recording had been very clear. The documentation had been very thorough. The math had been very exact. When Renata called to tell me, I sat in the studio with the phone against my ear and looked at the window. Still winter gray outside, still the old brick and new glass of the neighborhood in its long standoff. I did not feel what I had expected to feel. Not triumph, not the satisfaction of a punch landed. Something quieter and more profound. The feeling of a pressure I had so completely normalized that I had stopped being aware of carrying it, suddenly and completely absent. Like setting down a bag so heavy you had forgotten it was possible to put it down. The community consequences arrived quickly and without any coordination from me. The lawsuit had become public record the day it was filed, and public record in Baltimore, in a congregation that had known Leonard and me for 3 decades, travels at the velocity of a tight-knit community's collective conscience. The Deacon Board opened its own inquiry within 2 weeks. By mid-April, Leonard had been asked to step back from every position of leadership he had held in that building. The Finance Committee, the Pastoral Advisory Board, the positions that had given him standing and the social currency of a trusted man. People he had called friends for decades stopped calling, and my sister Patricia, who had sat at my kitchen table eating my food and laughing at my expense with the comfort of someone who had done it many times before and expected to go on doing it, lost the community that had been her entire social world within a month. The women who had sat beside her for years, who had exchanged recipes and Sunday morning pleasantries and passed the collection plate with a smile, made their accounting of her quietly and completely. She was not confronted with drama. She was not argued with. She was simply no longer seen, no longer greeted, no longer included, every door closed. I did not organize any of it. I want to be very clear about that. I had done the work that belonged to me. Gathered the evidence, found the attorney, sat in the conference room, pressed play. The community's response was their own moral decision, freely made. Justice does not always require orchestration. Sometimes it only requires that the truth be made visible. That summer, Dolores arrived at the senior living complex at 9 a.m. with her granddaughter's boyfriend's pickup truck and a paper bag of sandwiches from the deli 2 blocks over. We wrapped the dishes in the dish towels and the dish towels in the sweaters and the sweaters in the boxes. And she made me laugh 3 times. Once about the number of hymnals I was apparently planning to travel with. 1, just 1. Once about the efficiency of my kitchen packing, and once about something I will keep between the 2 of us. The studio where I had started the red beans and rice before sunrise every morning through an entire Baltimore winter went back to the building manager with a clean key and a clean floor. On the passenger seat of my car sat a canvas bag with a deep burgundy sweater folded neatly inside. Where the rubber-banded stack of bills had sat in January, on that cold morning when I could not make myself go inside, in that exact space, my sweater, mine, everything that mattered, within reach. I drove south, with the windows cracked even through the rain in Virginia. In Clearwater, Florida, on a Tuesday morning in late June, I sat across from a property manager and signed my name on a lease for a 1-bedroom apartment. Just my name. My own handwriting on a document that was mine entirely. No cosigner, no one else's name anywhere on the page, no permission required from anyone other than me. I pressed the pen down, and I felt the weight of it, the way you feel the weight of something you have been waiting for long enough that you had stopped letting yourself think about it. I am 72 years old. I signed a lease for my own life. That is exactly what it is supposed to feel like. The hymnal from my mother's funeral is on the nightstand in the new bedroom. The burgundy sweater hangs in the new closet. The light in Clearwater comes in through the windows in the morning and stays, broad, warm, the kind of light that asks nothing of you and gives everything. My bones have not ached since I arrived. Dolores and I text every Sunday. Someday soon, I will drive down a long Florida road in a graphite gray Audi A8, just because I spent 72 years never once buying myself something that beautiful for no reason other than that I wanted it. Not a reward, not a gift from someone else. Just the freedom of a woman who has earned her own life, choosing something beautiful with her own dollars and her own name on the registration. I am almost there. I can feel it. It is summer now, and the light outside my window in Clearwater is doing what light does here, arriving early, staying broad and golden, filling the apartment with warmth that has nothing to do with effort. In Baltimore, in January, I arranged warmth for myself before sunrise, so there would be something to come home to. Here, the warmth is simply present. Here, it finds me without my having to arrange it. 3 months since I signed the lease. I have found the farmer's market 6 blocks away, where a woman sells tomatoes that taste the way tomatoes are supposed to taste. I have found the coffee shop that opens at 6 and plays gospel on Friday mornings. I have found a choir, a good one, with voices that know how to build slowly and arrive at the peak of a hymn with patience. I will join them in September. I am already looking forward to it. I have been thinking about what I want to say to you. Not to Leonard, not to Patricia, not to anyone in that conference room on North Charles Street. To you, specifically to you, wherever you are listening from right now, whatever brought you to this story on this particular day. Because I do not think it is an accident that you are here. I think some stories find the people who need them. What happened to me has a legal name. I want you to know that. Because when it was happening to me, I did not know it. And that ignorance cost me years and $84,000, and my health and more of my self-belief than I have finished calculating. Elder financial abuse is a crime in every state in this country, not a family disagreement, not a miscommunication between people who once loved each other, a crime, prosecutable, documentable, recoverable from. If someone has redirected your income without your full understanding, opened accounts in your name without your knowledge, made financial decisions in your household while systematically excluding you from information about them, that is financial exploitation. If someone has combined that with a campaign to make you doubt your own memory, your own perception, your own capacity to understand what is happening to you, that is a layered form of abuse that has a name and a legal framework built to address it. You can contact Adult Protective Services in your county. You can reach out to a legal aid organization that specializes in elder law. Many operate on sliding scale fees. You can call the Elder Care Locator through the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. You can document what you are observing, even imperfectly, even without certainty, starting today. The documentation does not need to be complete before you ask for help. You only need to begin. I want to share something that changed the way I understood my own experience, something that matters to me deeply. American research indicates that over 5 million seniors are abused every year in this country. 5 million. The majority of them never report it because they have already been taught, by the person doing it, to doubt themselves, to explain it away, to absorb the evidence of their own exploitation and translate it into their own failure. Research with Latinos in the United States shows that 39% of seniors have experienced some form of abuse. 39%. And those numbers are almost certainly undercounts because silence is the most reliable tool available to anyone who exploits another person, and we have spent our lives being trained to keep that silence as though it were a virtue. It is not a virtue. It is a trap. The concrete thing I want to leave you with is this. The moment you begin to suspect something, start a document. Write down dates, amounts, specific words that were said, patterns you have noticed. Keep it somewhere only you can access. Find one person, just one outside the situation, and tell them what you have observed. Not because that person needs to fix everything, but because speaking a truth out loud to a witness is the first act of reclaiming it as your own. It is the act that precedes all other acts. It is the act I took on a cold January night at a small desk by a fogged window in Baltimore, and it changed the direction of the rest of my life. I think about the 40 minutes I sat in that parked car in January. The weight of it, the cold, the fog on the windows, the rubber-banded bills on the seat beside me. I was so tired. I was so thoroughly convinced that the confusion was mine that I could not even bring myself to go inside and face it. I sat in that car for 40 minutes. And then I went inside. And then I got up from the bathroom floor and took myself to the hospital. And then I pressed record. And then I signed my name on a lease in Clearwater, Florida, on a warm Tuesday morning, in the full and quiet knowledge that everything in that building was mine. If any part of this story landed somewhere in you today, I want to hear from you. Tell me where you are listening from, your city, your state, just a word in the comments that says, I am here. Tell me what you would have done in that parked car. Tell me what you felt when the recording played. I read everything you write to me, because this story did not begin with me, and it does not end with me, and your voice is part of it. If this resonated with you, please like this video. It is the simplest way to tell me you were here and that your story matters. And subscribe. Because every week there is another woman sitting in another parked car in another city, too tired to go inside, holding everything she needs without yet knowing it. Every week she deserves to know she is not alone. I signed my name on a lease in Clearwater, Florida. Just my name. 72 years old, and everything in that building is mine.